Big announcement, this is my first video on my new computer. So, hope you guys enjoy the video. Um, Ready have a nice day. I can't tell why my old account on YouTube, oh well. So, I just wanted to debunk this one video by this guy who's a socialist. And the video is titled about what about khamas? Everybody knows what that really means. Uh, so let's just debunk this video completely.
So if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I love rage bait. I mean, just look at the comments of my videos. People are still fighting in the comments of my old anti-communism video, and it's been 5 years.
Like, there's 60,000 comments. Like, look, the top comment has 400 replies.
Unfortunately, YouTube has this thing called community guidelines. That means if I were to give this video my usual rage bait title like, "Is hummus really that bad?" the channel would get immediately demonetized, deleted, put on canary mission 50 times over, and my face would get slapped on a no-fly list. As fun as these thumbnails are to make, they would not look good printed out on my kitchen counter. So, to appease Big Brother, let me read out my obligatory 1984 disclaimer. This video is not intended to support, promote, or glorify terrorist activities or incite extremist violence. It is created purely for entertainment and informational purposes. Are you happy? You're walking a fine line. For the Zionists in the audience, let me save you time.
At FBI.
Okay, so of course he's going to dehumanize the kidnapped on October 7th, which should have already gotten banned.
At Christy Gnome. This brown animated YouTube avatar is Hamas.
People think that Zionists hate brown people. Actually, like 20% of all Jews are literally from let me show you. Here's a map up. See, these are Mizrahi Jews. Literally 20%. See, they're basically Jews that are from a lot of from Muslim majority countries in the Middle East and North Africa. So.
Please arrest and deport him to the nearest ICE facility. Hamas, 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 Hamas.
Now, if you're not particularly sympathetic to the Palestinian resistance, or even an outright Zionist, I still think this video is worth watching.
Resistance, quotation marks.
Put yourself in the shoes of a Palestinian. I mean, you quite literally can't because your genocide supporter thinks all of them are human animals, but for the sake of the video, let's pretend.
Okay, so he's just using an out of touch quote with no context. Okay. So where's okay. Dates. Not that many.
And you can. And imagine growing up in the world's largest open-air prison, the Gaza ghetto. Your age isn't counted by years, but by how many...
It's not. He's gonna use ghetto. I think I know why. When did Israel leave Gaza? 2005. See, they completely withdrawal in 2005. Okay, so
wars old you are. Maybe you had friends or family killed in those wars. Any chance of leaving is blocked off by the bureaucratic Israeli permitting process, which already killed a family member who needed treatment in the West Bank. You have no hope for
Egypt already closes the border. He won't address this because it'll mean borders because they don't want.
the future, and peaceful protests don't seem to move the heart of Zionist soldiers who shot and permanently maimed one of your friends at one of these unarmed demonstrations. In this situation, what would you do? For most people, the answer is simple: violent resistance. Even former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said he would have joined a terrorist organization if he had been born Palestinian. Sometimes, things aren't just as clear-cut as terrorist versus freedom fighter. Sometimes one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Meanwhile, in mainstream pro-Palestine discourse, condemning Hamas is often a prerequisite to being seen as respectable. Rosa killer Bernard Sanders, for example, won't even lightly scold Israel without a caveat condemning Hamas for October 7th. But when we condemn Hamas and focus solely on Palestinian suffering, we're ultimately condemning those that choose, in the face of colonial barbarity, to take up arms.
Okay, so I'm about to debunk this guy. Okay. I can't probably even show the images of October 7th because, like, that's not YouTube appropriate. But just. What did he say? I forget. I blinked.
Is another person's freedom fighter. Meanwhile, in mainstream pro-Palestine discourse, condemning Hamas is often a prerequisite to being seen as respectable. Rosa killer Bernard Sanders, for example, won't even lightly scold Israel without a caveat condemning Hamas for October 7th. But when we condemn Hamas and focus solely on Palestinian suffering, we're ultimately condemning those that choose, in the face of
colonial barbarity. Okay. How long have Jews been in Israel? Israel. 4,000 years. 4,000. Palestinians, aka just Arabs, who call themselves Palestinians, who, you can call them Palestinians, Arabs, whatever you want. Because they're not colonizers, Jews. They just came back to their land, and this guy won't acknowledge that because that will completely collapse his narrative.
colonial barbarity, to take up arms and fight back. We leave behind the other side of colonial oppression: anti-colonial resistance. With Zionists single-mindedly thinking everyone who says genocide bad is Hamas, and so-called anti-Zionists condemning Hamas, it seems no one these days is willing to make an objective analysis of the organization. But I'm not one to shy away from controversy. Let's put aside all these preconceived feelings and look without reservation on what objective, scholarly sources have been saying about the topic for decades. And maybe, along the way, we'll learn something new. What? I'm already on Canary Mission and the no-fly list, and my dogs got doxxed on WikiFeet?
Did you just say dogs?
This is not an argument used by pretty much any actual Zionist.
In mathematics, the transitive property expresses if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Within Zionist circles exists a similar logic, the transitive property of Hamas. Because Hamas are terrorists and all Palestinians are Hamas, then all Palestinians are terrorists.
That's not true. Most people do not think that.
Furthermore, if Palestinians are terrorists, then anyone who supports Palestinian liberation are also terrorists. So if you say genocide bad, you're basically an anti-Septic Hamas jihadist. The transitive property of
Okay, that's another anti-Semitic thing that you just said. Anti-Septic. That is completely anti-Semitic. So, Let's get back.
Hamas is an ever-expanding consuming blob, where anyone who even mildly criticizes the Israeli government gets immediately subsumed by a Zionist logic chain so long and convoluted it ends with them wearing greed headbands and chanting death to Israel regarding the Labubu hostages of an Israeli EDM rave. The label has gotten so meaningless that even IDF soldiers get smeared as Hamas when they try to get West Bank settlers under control. So let's start by breaking one part of this chain, the idea that all Palestinians are Hamas. In reality, the Palestinian polity is not a unified blob, but intensely divided.
It is between Fatah and Hamas. They are both bad. Fatah is completely corrupt, and even their leader is very anti-Semitic. And Hamas is even worse, because they're actually very violent, and they control Gaza with an iron fist, and don't allow their civilians to go into Egypt to go to safety.
Israel for a long time has supported divisions between the two major players, Hamas and Fatah, by, for example, launching assaults on Gaza whenever the two seem close to a deal. This works in Israel's favor. If Palestinians remain politically divided, then they can just brush aside any attempts at negotiation by saying that there's no one to talk to. A key fact that Zionists love to use to argue that all Palestinians are Hamas is that in the 2006 Palestinian legislative elections, Hamas secured the most seats. Therefore, all Palestinians, for the rest of time, are Hamas terrorists and deserve to be genocided actually. So there's two parts to this. First, the genocide apologism is openly ridiculous. 2006 was almost 2 decades ago, and nearly half of the population of the Gaza Strip are children, meaning they weren't old enough to vote or even be born yet. And if electing a government that engaged in terrorism is grounds to collectively punish and genocide a population, Americans and Israelis in the audience should be sweating right now. Second, a key reason for Hamas's victory was the long-standing corruption and weakness of the other party, Fatah. Many Palestinians had become disillusioned with them, seeing them as nothing more than subcontractors to Israeli occupation, as peace talks still hadn't led to a Palestinian state, but instead worsened their living conditions.
Actually, there was a Palestinian state agreement in 1988.
Campaign on change reform, using their base of social welfare programs and legacy of armed resistance to launch a populist challenge to a divided Fatah, ultimately securing victory. But even those disillusioned Fatah are not all in the Hamas train. Many militant Palestinian factions continue to exist and maintain support. We have the PFLP and their armed wing, the Abu Ali Mustafa Brigades, the formerly Fatah-affiliated Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, the DFLP's Omar al-Qassam forces, Palestinian Islamic Jihad's Al-Quds Brigades, and the Mujahideen Brigades, each sporting.
Wow, those seem much better. Joking. They're all violent.
Their own colored headbands. Of course, Hamas and its Al-Qassam brigades are the largest of these armed factions, but the point is that the Palestinian polity cannot be reduced to Hamas. That's why, although the Palestinian public is generally split on Hamas, there's overwhelming support for resistance in general. Now that we've covered one part of the everyone is Hamas logic chain, let's look at the other part. Is Hamas anti-Semitic? Well, let's see what their 1988 charter has to say on this topic. Oh no, where's that music coming from? Our struggle against the Jews is very great and very serious. Their plan is embodied in the protocols of the elders of Zion, and their present conduct is the best proof of what we are saying. With their money, they took control of the world media, news agencies, the press, publishing houses, broadcasting stations, and others. They are behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most of the revolutions we've heard about and hear about here and there. Wow. Okay. Never mind, guys. I guess Hamas is cancelled. You know, I really should have known something was up with them when they were caught using AI art, but it's always the ones you suspect at least. Well, I hope you had a great time watching. Okay, hold it. So the 1988 charter tends to be the start and end when talking about Hamas's anti-Semitism. And yeah, it's very anti-Semitic. It doesn't differentiate between Jewish people and Zionists.
There's basically no difference. How many Jews are Zionists? It's gonna say like 90%. Yes, 90%, 5% of Jews are Zionists. All Zionism is that you want to have the Jews to have a Jewish state.
Cites the anti-Semitic forgery that is Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and argues that Jews control the world. But almost every academic source on the relationship between Hamas and his charter has been unequivocal that it very quickly held little relevance to the movement. Khalid Haroub states that only a few years after its release, the 1988 charter was shunted into the margins with little reference to its content. Paolo Caridi writes that the charter's significance has, in actual fact, been overestimated, replaced over the decades by other documents that are far more important in defining the strategy and politics of the Islamist movement. Other testimonies by Hamas members from around 2010 state that the charter was pretty much a relic at that point. So if the 1988 charter isn't really relevant to the organization anymore, or even just a few years after its release, let's see what their updated 2017 charter has to say. Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews.
That means that they're basically... That's not that much better, because 95% of Jews are Zionists. And if you live in Israel, you're probably like a Zionist. Like 99% of the people in like Israel are Zionists. So basically,
because of their religion. Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they're Jewish, but it wages a struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Yet it is the Zionists who constantly identify Judaism and the Jews with their own colonial project and legal entity.
that is not legal entity. Israel's not only legal entity. Let's just show the Peel Commission, which they could have easily accepted. Commission. 1937. See, like, if you actually look at the Peel Commission like very closely, like they were gonna give 90% of the land to the Arabs, like 80%, then like 5. Then they were gonna give Jerusalem and Tel Aviv to the British, kind of like a buffer zone, and then there were gonna be like a little sliver of land in the middle of the desert for the Jews. That was a very easy. The Jews accepted, the Arabs did not. They could have just been peace if that agreement had been signed very easily, and they would have gotten a much better deal.
Seriously? We're actually going to listen to what terrorists have to say. Yeah, because that's called basic journalism research, and Western media outlets have been more than willing to get the side of genocidal Zionist terrorists, which usually boils down to, "Excuse me, Israel, sir. I'm so sorry for even asking you an inconvenient question as a staunch opponent of all anti-Semitism and a proud supporter of the Jewish state. But dozens of human rights organizations have said you're committing a genocide."
What? Okay, the so-called genocide scholars, the so-called, anybody can actually sign up for their, and also there's no genocide. It's complete. The media has completely overblown this. There's still famine, which is tragic, but it's not severe. As severe as we thought it was. Sadly, 427 people died because of famine. May they rest in peace. But it wasn't like massive famine, like massive famine.
Oh, they're so stupid and gay. Do you have a response to these ridiculous allegations? So if the Western media complex is more than okay with getting the side of Zionist terrorists, why can't a D-list communist YouTuber get the side of Hamas? And if we, look at what Hamas has been saying and doing and read the scholarship that's been saying the same thing for decades, we can see that Hamas is not a static, unchanging monolith, but an ever-evolving movement. Their 2017 charter shows a distinct shift in rhetoric, espousing a contemporary and political tone in the discourse of global politics, and emphasizing their anti-colonial struggle against Zionism, not Jewish people as a whole. In fact, it goes even further, correctly pointing out the violent persecution.
Okay, that is not true. Literally, 800,000 Jews were expelled from Muslim countries after the establishment of Israel. They also slaughtered 700 Jews. Like, literally, did horrible things. This is a lie, because a lot of people who from the West have, I'm not saying like leftist people from the West, have actually not studied history as well as right-wing historians have. So let's keep
of Jewish people is a historically European phenomenon, not a Muslim or Arab one. When Zionists portray Hamas as bloodthirsty anti-Semites and cite a document almost 4 decades old, they ignore that Hamas has developed a far more sophisticated political understanding than
Okay, so you think that killing 1,400 Jews on October 7th is a more complex political ideology? That makes no sense. And kidnapping 100, 220 people, which 9 of them were American citizens.
decades since its founding. Another common misconception stemming from this intentional ignorance is the idea that according to Zionists, Hamas, much like Zoran Mamdani, wants to establish a theocratic global caliphate through terrorism, jihading every Jewish person in infinite 9/11s. Never mind the fact that Hamas didn't support 9/11. The fact is, Hamas has been
They actually did. They actually partied. Where is it?
saying that destroying Israel hasn't been its objective for a long time. Since at least the Second Intifada, Hamas has made clear in public statements and publications that its objective is a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as its capital, and the right of
that is not true. They want to destroy the state of Israel. Do not trust Hamas's 2017 charter. October 7th will prove that their 2017 charter does not even matter to them.
Return for refugees, while simultaneously not recognizing Israel or giving up all its claims to historic Palestine. In essence, Hamas's position has been a pragmatic acceptance of a two-state solution, but you wouldn't know that listening to Zionists who portray them as literally ISIS. Hamas has been pretty open about why it's done this. It's calling Israel and the international community's bluff. If there truly was an effort for a two-state,
well, then why they killed 1,400 Jews on October 7th, with completely destroyed the idea of a two-state solution, in my opinion. Why would you want to accept their offer? That's like saying, I hurt your dog, can I please have your house? That's basically the analogy I'm making.
state solution, then Hamas has already done its part and accepted it. Israel, of course, has heard these decades-long overtures from the movement and pretend they heard nothing. As I said in my last video, the two-state solution was long killed by Israel. Israel doesn't want any Palestinian state to provide the right of return to refugees, nor would it want to dismantle settlements in the West Bank. At most, Israel would give Palestinians a Bantustan with fake sovereignty, which is so insulting even Arafat rejected the offer at Camp David. That's the problem.
You think Arafat would accept anything? Like, literally, he was given, like, I think 3 offers, never accepted them. And they're pretty good offers. They were going to give up the holiest site in Judaism for a two-state solution.
The terrorist paradigm is a thought-terminating cliche that circumvents the hard work of politics and instead promotes a mindset of obliteration. You can't negotiate with terrorists, you have to destroy them. So let's talk about the elephant in the room: terrorism. Are Hamas terrorists? Well, according to the US State Department definition, yeah, they are.
The US State Department. See, here's the US State Department. Okay, let's go on the website. Okay, let's search. US State Department, terrorism, report. Let's look on, so terrorism, okay.
Wait, he admitted it? I think we got him!
I gotta talk to this blind.
But unless you're a CIA asset, who would take the US State Department at face value?
Oh.
For one, why is their definition limited to subnational groups or clandestine agents, yet excludes states?
Because states are government entities. I don't think you get that, buddy. Or whoever this guy is, spooky, scary, socialist.
It's the biggest perpetrator of organized violence against civilians. And what's the difference between indiscriminate violence against civilians versus legitimate armed resistance for internationally sanctioned rights that ends up killing civilians? If Hamas are terrorists, what does that make Israel, who's murdered over 600,000 Palestinians and there's—
That's not true. Okay, let's look at the Gaza war casualties. Casualties. Yeah, let's look at the casualties. The casualties are around 63,513, around 20,000 which were terrorists, so it puts the number at 49,513. Okay, so... No.
Systemic genocide and destruction of life in Gaza. More to the point, Israel's violence is part of its settler colonial project that started in 1948 when it ethnically cleansed Palestinians from the land, and since 1967 it's been illegally occupying the West Bank and Gaza Strip as recognized.
That's not true. The UN, there's a great video by PragerU, and it suggested to Israel 1948 border. They had that. It was a non-legally binding suggestion. Then years later, they retracted their position for political reasons. To saying that there is an occupation.
An international law. Designating Hamas as quote-unquote terrorists erases not only the colonial nature of the conflict, but also the asymmetry of violence which at every level has tilted towards Israel. More than that, it depoliticizes the Palestinian liberation movement's demand for an end to the occupation. For all these reasons and more, scholars and experts have increasingly moved away from a terrorist paradigm to understand Hamas. Tariq Bakoni rejects the label. Glenn Robinson believes the label overlooks Hamas's more important dimensions as a social movement. Menachem Klein notes that Hamas
most of these are far leftists, I think.
Its position dynamically in response to Palestinian public opinion, and so on and so forth. Most serious scholarly studies of Hamas recognize that violence is not a genetic attribute of the movement, but rather a tactic employed for various political and pragmatic reasons in particular circumstances. And so, let's talk about
that was made in January 2004, over 20 years ago, so 21 years ago. So, it's completely incorrect. Time to debunk this more. We're going to debunk this video. There's still all
of Hamas's use of terrorism as a tactic. Whoa, that's a bit too much, isn't it? Aren't you getting a little too close to breaking our community guidelines? Well, what do you want me to make? It's not like anyone else on YouTube has made a good video on misconceptions about Hamas. You know, why don't you try making a fun, light-hearted video that engages both sides of the pro-genocide and anti-genocide debate? Like that one YouTube channel.
Okay, dehumanizing Zionists. That is actually calling for the explosion of an Israeli tank, which would kill people, which is a direct violation of YouTube's community guidelines.
Gaza's population is on the brink of famine.
I want to return to a larger point that scholarship on Hamas takes pains to emphasize, that violence is not a genetic attribute of the movement, but rather a tactic deployed in response to various internal and external factors. The history of the Islamic movement in Palestine hasn't always been one of armed jihad against the occupation. The predecessor of Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, believed in peaceful Islamization. Gradually,
after Iran buddied up with them, they decided to become violent. This guy will talk about that.
Building a virtuous Islamic Palestinian society that, only later, would struggle against the Zionist occupation. To that end, the Muslim Brotherhood built and ran schools, charities, and social clubs, expanding its influence and providing a counterweight to secular organizations.
Okay, this part's true, except for that they got money from Iran after the Iranian Revolution.
But their peaceful methods were controversial. In the 1980s, some members left to form Palestinian Islamic Jihad to wage armed resistance. Then, when Palestinian civil society erupted in the First Intifada, the Muslim Brotherhood responded to popular opinion and formed Hamas, embracing armed struggle in conjunction with its goal of Islamization. Just looking at this brief history, it's apparent how internal factors like Palestinian public opinion and their own membership's opinion, as well as external factors like the intensification of Israeli occupation, led to the formation of Hamas. And when looking at Hamas's adoption of sewer slide bombings, a similar dynamic is visible. On February 25, 1944, an Israeli terrorist gunned down 29 worshippers in a Hebron mosque on the final days of Ramadan. Before that point, Hamas had only targeted Israeli soldiers, mostly in response to popular demand. After the massacre, however, Hamas embraced the targeting of Israeli civilians through terrorist attacks.
This is one of the most misconceived it was a terrorist attack, but it's very misconceived by general media. Plus, that's basically just sinking how low that guy did, and you should never sink as low as someone who committed a terrorist attack to yourself committing a terrorist attack. That's going very low as they were, but that guy was wrong in killing 9 people. Like, that was not the right thing to do. But sinking even lower than that guy, killing 1,400 civilians, is not okay. You should. Most movements that have been peaceful have been very successful in swaying public opinion. So if Palestinians became more peaceful, there could easily be a two-state solution. Just like the civil rights movement in the U.S. and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and many other things.
Attacks. A Hamas leader in Gaza stated, without Hebron, Hamas would not have been able to justify its suicide attacks. Ben Gvir, the current Israeli Minister for National Security, hung up the shooter's portrait, which he only took down after entering the Knesset. This was the rationale for suicide attacks. If Israel attacked Palestinian civilians, then Hamas would attack Israeli civilians. It was a form of asymmetrical warfare against an overwhelmingly powerful occupation that was and is all too willing to target innocent civilians. As shockingly violent as these bombings were, they were ultimately a result of an interactive colonial process of violence stemming from the occupation itself. Nevertheless, Hamas repeatedly offered ceasefires which were brushed off by Israel, and eventually the movement enacted multiple unilateral ceasefires. It should go without saying that these suicide operations were broadly a failure, which is a big reason Hamas has broadly abandoned the tactic for decades now. Rather than compelling Israel to concede or lighten its occupation over the Palestinian territories, their iron fist continued. Nevertheless, the bad optics of suicide bombings were really damaging internationally, and helped Israel conflate Hamas with Islamic terrorism organizations like The view that Hamas is literally ISIS is one that's been propagated by Zionists, including
they're similar, but not 100% the same.
Actor from Stranger Things. Millie, take care of him. But let's not run over this talking point and take it seriously. Is Hamas ISIS, a local manifestation of a global Islamic terrorist network?
They're different because Hamas is a terrorist organization. And that then ISIS, which ISIS was a international global organization. The one thing that he gets correct, one of the only things that he gets correct, he only gets 3 things correct in this whole entire video, is that Hamas does not equal ISIS, but they contribute to the same level of atrocities because they both do horrible things.
And is the Israeli portrayal true that it's at the forefront of the global war on terrorism, preventing Hamas from enacting infinite 9/11s around the world? No. So, scholarship in Hamas has long pointed out that there are key differences between the movement and others like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Because we live in an Islamophobic society that thinks all organizations are the same,
70% of Muslim, 70% of Israel's population is Muslims. That's literally 2 million people. And they're very happy in Israel. They're completely fine staying in Israel.
Real differences are papered over in favor of a monolithic view of them that they're all terrorists who hate freedom and want to kill every Westerner. For example, unlike Al-Qaeda, Hamas does not advocate transnational violent arms struggle against the West, but instead it limits itself to the confines of historic Palestine to end an occupation deemed illegal by international law. Hamas, at its core, is a nationalist movement operating through a religious framework, less like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and more like other anti-colonial national liberation groups. This is visible in the way Hamas has responded to radical jihadists influenced by Al-Qaeda in Gaza. In response to Salafi jihadists, Hamas has cracked down both by repression, but also by hosting sessions aimed at debunking their interpretation of Islam. Thanks to this, Hamas was able to negotiate through
they still want jihad. Hamas literally called for a day where they would try to kill Jews. Their supporters were supposed to kill Jews. It was mostly a large failure, except for, sadly, 3 people died because they caused for they attack Jews.
Release of Alan Johnson, a BBC reporter held by Salafist jihadists in Gaza. Significantly, in Gaza, Hamas has not imposed Sharia law, much to the criticism of Islamic extremists.
They actually do. Like, this guy's completely incorrect. They support Sharia law. They want Sharia law. They literally killed forces that were from a different group just because they disagreed with them. They literally executed them in horrible ways. Not appropriate for YouTube.
To conflate Hamas with ISIS is that it's Israel who's backing ISIS-affiliated gangs to steal the bare minimum aid that they let in, all the while accusing Hamas of stealing aid to justify the ongoing famine Israel is
stealing aid
on Gaza.
The UN hasn't even admitted that.
I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of women's life under Hamas. Under their rule, there has been a rising incidence of women killed for honor crimes, with the government failing to address it. And as I said before, although Hamas hasn't implemented Sharia law, it's nevertheless willing to violently enforce its Islamization agenda, intimidating or even attacking women who refuse to cover their heads. Although Hamas doesn't have the best record on women's rights, it's also far from organizations like the Taliban, ISIS, or Al-Qaeda. For one, Hamas allows women to receive an education, go to university, and work. Women also benefit from the social programs run by Hamas, including food distribution centers, medical clinics, and nurseries. These grassroots networks are one of 6 elections, one of the few democratic
Okay. Maybe govern up power
in the 2006
years.
elections, one of the few democratic elections held in that region as testified by virtually everybody. This democratic Hamas government, however, was never able to get off the ground. Almost immediately, the United States and Israel
That's not true. They literally left Gaza like a year before, and they were completely fine with them ruling. They literally left the Rafah crossing, which he has a troop over there, which is completely incorrect. It is completely incorrect, because this is the Rafah crossing right here. They literally left the Rafah crossing a while ago, but then they came back, then they left.
enacted a crushing blockade on Gaza. Fatah was secretly equipped and trained by the US to overthrow Hamas, and Palestinians in Gaza were made to suffer for practicing their democratic right to vote. The Hamas government never had a chance to govern, instead taking control of the Gaza Strip in June 2007. Their assertion that Fatah had been part of a US-backed conspiracy to overthrow its government was vindicated by the discovery of stored American weapons in preparation for a coup. In short, Hamas won an election, was subsequently subverted by internal and external forces, and acted decisively to preempt a US-backed coup. Since taking power, Hamas hasn't held elections, in part because of the instituted division between Gaza and the West Bank. Instead, its rule in Gaza has been characterized by Tariq Bakoni as soft authoritarianism, or a liberal democracy, tolerating a certain level of dissent while also clamping down in moments of repression. I don't want to downplay this repression. Even when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, it was a bloody fratricidal conflict that ended with hundreds of Palestinians killed. Hamas has been credibly accused of human rights violations during its governance of Gaza, for example, taking advantage of Israeli bombings to extrajudicially assassinate domestic enemies. But these criticisms against the Hamas government misunderstand that it's fundamentally not a government. It has no real sovereignty, it's unable to control its borders.
See, so you literally just admitted that it's not a real government. That means it doesn't equal a state.
Halt the Israeli blockade or even stop bombs from falling on its people. It's an administration under occupation and impoverished by conditions
that is actually not true. It's not an administration. It is a violent terrorist organization
by the Zionist entity. If concerns about Palestinian democracy were genuine, they would be foremost concerned with the blockade and divided Palestinian polity instituted and enforced by Israel. In the midst of the ongoing genocide, Hamas has repeatedly offered to give up its governing power. As I said before, Hamas is not Al-Qaeda or ISIS. It's not interested in creating a theocratic caliphate, but rather giving Palestinians a democratic voice and self-determination, as they say in their 2017 charter. During the ongoing genocide, they've repeatedly offered to give up control of Gaza to a national unity government, a technocratic government, or even a committee of independent Gazan leaders.
That's not true. They did not accept that deal. They only accepted parts of that deal.
Parts have all been rejected or ignored, which betrays the Zionist myth that if it's true that Hamas has moderated its positions and is basically willing to settle for a two-state solution, why hasn't there been peace yet? There are three main sticking points that Israel likes to point to. 1, that Hamas refuses to renounce violence. 2, that they refuse to recognize Israel. And 3, that they refuse to accept past agreements, including the Oslo Accords. We could go through each of these points and point out that, for example, Hamas has repeatedly offered to rein in its violence and, when ignored, even unilaterally ceased attacking Israeli civilians, that powerful political parties in Israel refuse to even recognize the existence of Palestinians, and that Oslo is basically null and void because Israel has refused to follow through on its commitments to securing
actually have followed through those commitments.
Palestinian state. But even beyond that, Hamas isn't ignorant. They've seen the trajectory of the PLO, which did all these things. Abandoned armed struggle, recognized Israel, and spearheaded Oslo. They saw that the PLO's path of negotiations was ultimately fruitless, gained nothing for the Palestinian people, and in fact made their lives materially worse. When Hamas won the 2006 elections, they were explicit that they wouldn't concede on these points unless they got something in return. We will not be in the politics of free concessions. It's ultimately Israel that refuses peace. They've openly bragged about sabotaging peace deals, dividing the Palestinian polity, and then paint Hamas as irrational, mindless, anti-Semitic terrorists who can't be negotiated with. Even the common refrain, "But what about the hostages?" has gotten old. Hamas has repeatedly offered all-for-all deals in which
were completely unfair for Israel because they had to release like 10,000 terrorists.
Free all its hostages for all the thousands of Palestinian hostages kept and abused by Israel to no avail. Hamas wants peace. They've repeatedly offered it and shown that they're trustworthy by reining in other resistance factions during various ceasefires with Israel, which even Israel acknowledges. In contrast, Israel has repeatedly torpedoed ceasefire deals, renegating on agreements to continue a bloodthirsty genocide whose objectives are to openly massacre Palestinians. The truth is, between
the reason they aren't violating first Hamas attacks and they respond, that's usually what happens during ceasefires.
Hamas and Israel, if we're looking for an irrational, untrustworthy terrorist bent on genocide and destruction, Israel fits the bill much better than Hamas.
Clink clank. Initiating atrocity propaganda speed round debunking. Deploying special Zionist projection response.
No, they didn't, but the IDF did kill Jewish Israeli children with their tanks fired on houses after issuing the Hannibal Directive.
That is not true. That is an anti-Semitic myth. This guy probably watches a lot of anti-Semitic shows.
No evidence of Hamas doing that, plus Israel actually does do that with Palestinians, which we have photographic and video proof of them doing.
That's actually not true. That is completely a lie. This guy keeps lying. We'll just...
No evidence of Hamas doing that, plus Israel actually does do that.
That's not true. That is actually so not true. Okay, this guy is completely lying. This guy's distorting photos. Hamas uses human fields. They've used them for like years. He's using Al Jazeera.
Palestinians, which we have photographic and video proof of them doing.
You're confusing Hamas with the ISIS-linked gangs Israel's funding.
That's actually not true.
The Israeli airstrikes in Doha, Qatar were captured by security cameras.
They would.
That's messed up. Would you actually do that? No, of course not, man. We're chill.
Okay, that's completely fake.
In Albion, no matter where you go or what
They
you do, your mount will accompany you on your
pretty
journey.
much anybody
Perhaps
off the roof. I'm not defending violence, but if anybody, like any pro-Palestinian, probably went into Gaza, like actual Gaza, like, and they met a Hamas member, I'm not condemning, I'm not supporting violence. There would probably not be a very good ending for either parties.
Probably the most pernicious myth about Hamas, one underlying the ongoing genocide in Gaza, is that it can be defeated. On the ground, we can see that this is objectively untrue. Hamas began the war with roughly 40,000 fighters, and their fighting force remains fundamentally the same almost 2 years into this war. IDF soldiers go into Gaza, quote-unquote clear out an area, and then return months later to find guerrilla fighters putting up fierce resistance from tunnels. Israeli war experts have acknowledged that if the war's goal was to destroy Hamas, it's been a total failure and will not achieve its aim. Because IDF soldiers get wrecked when they're up against a real fighting force, they've resorted to genociding a powerless civilian population. Israel can never kill the human will to resist occupation. The problem isn't Hamas, it's the existence of Palestinians who, since being ethically cleansed from their land in 1948, have refused to
That's not true, they were not ethnically cleansed. The Arabs leaders told them to go.
concede to the Zionist occupiers. Hamas is simply the modern-day incarnation of Palestinian nationalism, more Islamic in form, but in continuity with the Great Arab Revolt of 1936 and the PLO. The right to violently resist a colonial occupation is, of course, an internationally recognized right. This video is not aimed to completely exonerate everything Hamas has done. They've committed gruesome massacres, the rule in Gaza has engaged in brutal repression, and they're partly to blame for the ongoing division of the Palestinian polity. But to say that Hamas are mindless terrorists bent on destroying Israel is objectively incorrect. Their demands are pragmatic and moderate, they've limited their armed resistance to the borders of historic Palestine, their immediate goal is basically a two-state solution, and they support a democratic, not theocratic Palestinian state. If there's a serious effort to end the conflict, Hamas's political demands and the demands of the Palestinian resistance in general must be taken seriously. Decades of depoliticizing, ignoring, and painting Hamas as rational terrorists got us to October 7th. To quote a senior leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, even if, through the sheer power of its genocidal bombs, Israel succeeded in destroying Hamas,
there may come a day when Israel finds itself longing for Hamas.
I think that's enough. This type of content is bordering on glorifying terrorism. But haven't you been watching? The whole point is that Hamas is more than that. It's also a social movement, and a government, and a resistance movement, and Enough! We're taking you away. To where? Epstein Island? Even worse. For the crime of making light of our community guidelines. Islamic terrorists who want to kill all Jews everywhere. But there's a limit to an academic perspective. For one, almost every university is folding when the current Trump administration puts the tiniest bit of pressure to crack down on pro-Palestine speech. This has also led to many academics recanting their ostensibly decolonial work to condemn the Palestinian resistance. I guess decolonization is not a metaphor, but only when it's not Palestinian decolonization, huh? But beyond some academics rendering their own work intellectually and morally bankrupt, it also removes itself from the reality of the Palestinian resistance. To see almost daily videos of fighters tearing down occupation walls, halting the tanks of genocide, and striking fear into the Zionist occupiers serves as a challenge to everyone outside of Palestine to have even a fraction of their bravery. I've grappled with what it means to create content during a genocide, while Palestinian artists, creators, and humans with hopes and dreams perish under the US-provided Israeli-launched bombs. And although most creators have done well to expose genocidal Zionist crimes against Palestinian civilians, there isn't nearly enough content highlighting the resistance to that genocide.
That's very
Barring John Elmer's weekly resistance reports and a few other good video essayists. Seriously, check out Rev and Rev's video, it's probably the best thing I've ever seen on this topic.
The Gaza ghetto. Okay, that is like the most interesting thing I've seen all day. That's probably
we operate in an environment of algorithmic slop with hostile community guidelines and the threat of demonetization. We don't use words like unalive or suicide. But almost 2 years into this genocide, we should strive to have even a fraction of the courage of the Palestinian resistance. And this isn't only about content creators, this is about all of us. What is our duty when we see a genocide in our feed every day? The bare minimum should be to commend, not condemn, resistance to genocide. Okay, that's enough. Back to the slop mines.
Am I, M20s, the a-hole for taking 2 months to upload a video?